just a few snapshots of some of the events that we've done. So we would love to connect with those of you who we haven't about how we can support your initiatives. We have a really fun event called Hustle Summit here. We have a good number of employers who have been there, recognize you from the wonderful photos that we take and use. I'm like, is anyone here in those photos? Okay, no, maybe not. But, so this is our epic diversity recruitment event we do in New York and Chicago. So the next one's coming up in July. I also want to give a huge shout out to Bustle. Can we give a huge round of applause to Bustle? So Alex has been working with Findspark for like 3 or 4 years. Yeah, 3 or 4 years now. And actually in the back, Ashlyn, Findspark community member who's hired through Findspark to work with Alex. So fun story there. And round of applause to also all the Bustle people who are here. Bustle people in the back. Yeah. So if you are a current partner of ours, let me know if you're interested in hosting one of these. Our next one is on the books for June 6th at Tech Systems. We have one of our speakers here in the back, Sydney, at Cloud Reach. Jamia's online. And Jamia's online. So we also have folks in the virtual chat. How many? Hey, chat people. And there is actually like a chat functionality. So there's 23 people in the chat as well. In line with helping really amazing employers or people who work in the talent space, we did just launch a employer dialogue Slack group. So definitely check that out. We'll email it out afterwards as well. And with that, move the next slide. I'm afraid to click twice. Coming up are the backgrounds. So just to give you a sense of the rest of the format of the evening, oh my gosh. The morning. I'm not a morning person. So all of the questions that I'm going to ask as the moderator are questions that you all asked or people virtually asked. So with the registration process, we asked you, what are your questions? So these are all coming from you. So because we want to make sure that we save time also for you to network with each other, which so happy to see many of you doing that already. We're not going to do Q&A from the audience afterward because basically this is like a long Q&A from the audience. And again, we want to save plenty of time for you to network. Although I will say any questions for the virtual people, we can maybe moderate some of those. Pressing this button harder to get to the next slide. If you want to share on, if you want to share on social, our hashtag for all of our events. Oh, we skipped forward. It should be one back. Yeah, perfect. All right. Are we sitting in order? No, that's okay. But we look like our pictures, so it's fine. So if you want to live tweet, share, post about today, the hashtag is Findspark. It's always Findspark for all of our events. So with that, I'm going to get started. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So because you all have different titles, and different titles mean different things, would love for everyone to just give a quick background on what you do currently and a little bit of the background of what you did previous to the role you're in now.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Isurieta. I'm the SVP Director, Talent Acquisition of Gray New York and Gray North America, really. And I also founded and head up all of our diversity initiatives at our agency. Prior to that, I was an outside recruiter for 6 years, maybe, and an editor.
Hi, my name is Sue Cho. I'm the head of people at a very small Series A company called Petal. We are about 30 people based in Chinatown right now, moving shortly. Prior to Petal, I was the head of people at Kickstarter and at First Dibs, and there's a couple First Dibs folks here, and also at Venmo. So I've kind of seen a lot of different startups at different phases and kind of worked with people on all diversity issues.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Katrina Jones. I am the Director of People and Inclusion at Vimeo. So what that means is I lead the diversity and inclusion strategy and implementation of that strategy at Vimeo with some touch into some of our HR in terms of how are we engaging with employees and our HR processes. And prior to that, I was at Accenture as a Global Inclusion and Diversity Lead, working with different segments, diversity segments, and working on campaigns throughout the year and making sure that we were recruiting, retaining, progressing, promoting all our underrepresented minorities and women.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Finkel, and I am the Editorial Operations Director at Bustle. So welcome again to our office. So I lead all of our part-time editorial talent acquisition and recruiting here at Bustle. And what's great is that we've grown to 4 brands now. So it's also with Romper, Elite Daily, and the So Report. I also work on community development and our partnerships, like And part of that, actually, this has been pretty much my only job for the last 5 years. So it's been really amazing to watch the company grow from about 5 people to a team of more than 200. And so it's really exciting that the whole time I feel like I've been in contact with you and you got to watch us grow as well.
So a lot of the questions were around starting out and introducing conversations around diversity and inclusion. I know some of you have it more integrated or a formal part of your role than others. So it would be really interesting for each of you to share a little bit about at your current role, how these conversations started. So, you launched all the diversity initiatives, like what were some of the sparks for getting those off the ground, and integrating within that leadership, working with leadership, because a lot of the questions we got were around how to get leadership buy-in, or if you already have it, like from the chief creative officer at Gray, how do you move forward with that?
Yeah, sure. So I work technically in HR, and most of the women in HR were not interested in focusing on diversity and inclusion because they've all been there, done that. It always falls flat. I, as the head of recruitment, really see the importance of it. Not that they don't, but see how it affects the agency. And I really have a view of certain departments that really are all white men. And I've been fighting against that trend for my 7 years at Gray. So that's really how I got it started. I just said, forget it. I'm just going to do it. If no one else wants to get on board with me, there's people at the agency who do want to get on board. So I founded our People's Council, which I invited certain members of the agency who I knew were passionate about it, to sit with me on a council and start deciding what events we were going to do for the agency, and then begged and begged and begged for money. I'm still begging for money. The great thing though is when you can find one leader, at least one leader who's really on board. Advertising has a large male gay population, as does PR. So that group was doing really, really well. But the women's group, as well as the multicultural group, didn't really have those sponsors. So I really just started rubbing elbows with my senior leaders and saying, hey guys, we need support. We need you to show up at these events. It's important to the agency, it's important to our growth, and now it's important to our clients. And then when John came on board, our worldwide CCO, Chief Creative Officer, that was a big push for him, because in the creative industry, there's a lack of women and a lack of diversity. But in particular, the creative department, that's where you really, really see the lack of women in leadership. So that was his big core piece. So it's been great to have him as my executive sponsor.
So for me, I think right now at Petal, because we're so small, and I literally just started a month ago, this was a big part of my sort of interview process, and it was something that I was interviewing them on and asking, like, how much does this matter to you? And given that our product is a credit card that is trying to create financial inclusion and diversity is really important to us. So that is the reason why I'm at this company, is because I really felt like the leadership and I really agreed on many different people principles. So I think that's one way of making sure that you're finding a company that really believes and walks the talk, not just talks. But in prior roles where I kind of came in and there was already kind of 50, 60, 200s of people, I found generally the employees, especially at startups, tend to be more enlightened. They're looking for more diversity. They recognize that it's a way for them to get better and learn from each other. And I find that the having them come together and bring up this as a topic is so powerful with leaders. If I were to go to a leader and say, hey, I think it's really important to start a diversity initiative, I think people great, that sounds great, go do it, and probably be supportive, but not actually attend events and put budget behind it. But when you actually have employees get together and make it a point to say this is something that's really important to us, I think that carries a lot more weight. So at First Dibs, we had an amazing employee who's now at Vimeo, who started our first employee resource group specifically around diversity and inclusion called Diversity, right? And so with that, I think really created a critical mass of people who found this to be really important. So that was a very helpful way to push it forward.
I can definitely echo what Sue said, just about employees driving the conversation, because Tia, who's now at Vimeo and who's amazing. Our employees organically formed employee groups, employee community groups is what we call them at Vimeo, also known as employee resource groups. And they advocated for my role in particular. So that was really compelling to me that there was a push from employees, and as a result, leadership was bought into the importance of the role and what the role should do or should be accountable for in driving diversity. I also find in my current and previous experiences that, a large part of what I do is having sometimes uncomfortable conversations and bringing people to places that they don't necessarily want to go. And sometimes pushing where people are even not quite ready to go. So, for example, on gender pay equality. So one of the conversations that I had at Accenture was around making sure that we took an intersectional approach when talking about gender pay equality. That the 78 cents for a dollar missed out on women of color, Latinx women, Black women, Native American women who were paid significantly lower on the dollar. And those are important conversations to have with people at all levels, and especially at leadership. And it's risky, sometimes you push people, you may feel like you're pushing people a little too far, but I do find that eventually people do evolve and make it to a place where they're able to absorb the conversation and eventually act on it.
And, I found it really lucky that in the past 2 years, our company is a female-focused company. So when it comes to, women, both, being employed and in leadership roles, we've been really lucky that has been sort of a core part of the company since we started. That said, as one of the earliest employees and also as the earliest woman of color employee, it was something that I didn't really know that much about as far as diversity and inclusion when I was starting out here, and has become a really big passion of mine as the company has grown and as my role has sort of shifted. And I also feel really lucky that the team that are on our HR team, kind of echoing Sue and Katrina, they are really receptive to kind of initiatives and pushing the boundaries of what we want to do. And I think one, that's because, we are a site that reaches especially millennials, which I think, as probably many of you are, it's really, it's a different generation of people and what they're focused on, which is very interesting, probably compared to, kind of what you were talking about in your company. So yeah, everyone has been really receptive, but I think we're constantly trying to innovate and really learn from our peers too. I'm here as a learner as well, and I think also collaborating with Findspark and teaching me even things that I didn't know before has been really great.
And so, what are some of the steps or thought processes you had to deciding what sort of things to do first? Because I'm sure that's something that can be really overwhelming, and we've talked to so many people who, they want to support D&I. It's a very big phrase that can mean a lot of things at a lot of different companies. So what are some things you've thought about in terms of doing the people's councils first, or even just on surface level career pages or communications? Anyone have a little bit to share on that in terms of just the thought process and working with the team to decide what do we do first?
I started People's Council because I wanted to be very clear that it was not an HR initiative. People hear HR initiative and they immediately go, so I really wanted it to be about the agency and about the people who work there. And in order to do that, I needed to get those people onto the council. I'm really the shepherd of it. I, obviously offer thoughts and guidance, but I really leave it to them to figure out what does their community need at the agency, where are the gaps, and what are people going to respond to best, and then I act to just kind of help push it through and try to get more and more people involved.
We just went through the process of setting our 2018 strategy for diversity and inclusion at Vimeo. So I started, and I often start with discovery, which is sitting down and talking to different groups and different groups of people, really trying to understand the different experiences that people are having, perspectives, etc., and then figuring out, what are the easy, quick things we could do that will get us some immediate wins and are gratifying, not just, from a leadership perspective, but from an employee perspective. One thing, and you can do like big and small things. So one of the smaller low-hanging fruit things was that in our Brooklyn office in Bushwick at Mineo, we had the second floor restrooms which were gendered, so split into the binary men, women. And one of the requests that we've gotten was to make them gender open. And that was a pretty easy thing to do because we own the space, we solicited feedback from people and ultimately made the decision to make the restrooms gender open and made the tweaks that we needed to make. It's, the response from people has been incredibly impactful and they're so happy to see that and it means a lot. Now there's a lot more that we have to do on the side of making sure that our processes when it comes to promotion, recruiting are equitable and removing barriers for underrepresented people. And so that's stuff that takes more time and is also rewarding, but you have to invest in the right tools to make it effective.
And does anyone would be willing to share maybe like a memorable, like uncomfortable conversation with like peers or leadership? Just because I know that's a big part of D&I is just like there's fear of saying the wrong thing and not saying the right thing with your bosses, with your peers, with people below you, offending people, that sort of thing can be so incredibly tricky. And I know I didn't put this on the list, so I'm just curious. I'm just throwing this out there as we're going to do a little improv, but I think that might be really helpful in terms of how to, there's a specific example and also just how you dealt with it, like the aftermath per se, anything like that.
So two examples come to mind immediately. One is much less, I think, uncomfortable, but I could tell it made the other person squirm a little bit, just in asking them when is the first time that they became aware of their race. And from my perspective, I grew up in a predominantly white environment, so it was very early on that I was aware that I was different from everybody else. For that person, they grew up in a very homogeneous environment, and so in asking the question, they really sat with it and did squirm a little bit, and just thinking that they didn't have that moment where they were aware of it because it was something they didn't need to be conscious of. So that was interesting, and I like those one-on-one dialogues, for the privacy and just to tell people like it's okay. You don't have to be perfect in the things that you say. And I think one of the things that we really need to address within diversity and inclusion is providing people that safe space and making sure that they're having conversations in a trusted environment and also giving people the language and extending a bit of grace to folks.
I think for me, it was when I was bringing up the idea of starting the People's Council and really focusing on diversity and sitting with our global CEO. And, Gray is his baby. He helped turn it around. He's been there for 10 years now, and explaining to him that there were biases at our agency. And it was very uncomfortable for him. He is a Black man. He is the head of a massive agency. And so to hear that there's biases in our agency was really upsetting to him. And he's like, well, that's not the agency I know. And, had to kind of give him some examples of what I've witnessed just in the recruitment process. And it was just, you could see him getting very upset about that this is what was going on in his agency and he hadn't seen it.
So just in terms of where I am right now at Petal, like we're still growing out the team. And so there's really not a lot of things to fix. It's all just like building. So like as I think about promotion processes and reviews and hiring, like I'm taking that lens of making sure that we're doing things in an equitable way. But I think, one conversation, and I'm forgetting whether it was actually Pedal, or a previous company, but was when we were talking about hiring someone, and it was a male engineer, and I was like, well, have we talked to any female engineers? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, okay. I mean, not to say that we should not hire this person, but I just want to understand, like how important is diversity and inclusion to you, because it requires us to take an extra step and do something a little bit more if it's something that we want to prioritize. Because I mean, the easy answer is to say, well, there's no one to apply. I'm like, well, yeah, that's true, but if we really care about this and something that we want to make a mark on, then we have to go out there and find people. And I wouldn't say it was like a super uncomfortable conversation, but it made him think, okay, well, maybe we should be thinking about it.
Well, and good transition into recruitment and hiring process as well. And we will have, so we're going to rotate between diversity and inclusion, employer branding's next, and recruitment. We'll keep circling back around. And obviously, like, there's a lot of overlap, but so the hiring process through the D&I lens, like a lot of the questions were around how do you recognize bias and interview in other like hiring manager processes, early steps in terms of even, again, I mentioned career pages. Like we actually wrote an article about, I think Vimeo is one of the featured companies, and company career pages that do a really great job talking about D&I, because we know in the Findspark community, a really diverse community, and they might be looking at these career pages or looking at the social media accounts and seeing like, maybe I don't feel like I'll fit there and that sort of thing. So just maybe each of you touching a little bit about different steps that you've taken within the interview hiring process to make it more equitable in terms of people having that same chance, that sort of, and especially around making sure the pool is big enough, because there's a lot of studies that show that's like really important to make sure the pool is big enough.
We instituted the Rooney Rule, which started with the NFL, that mandates that you find at least one diverse candidate for every senior level search that you do. I caveat that with, I also have to find the best talent. So sometimes there isn't a diverse member in that grouping. But by doing it that way, it puts the onus on the hiring manager and turns the lens on them. And if it's, okay, we've been through 15 candidates, the ones you've moved forward have all been white males, there's a problem. And they can't really squirm out of that one. So that way, it's just, here's a slate of candidates, they're all amazing. Let's go from there, and then I can have those difficult conversations when needed.
Yes, I've always been fascinated with Rooney Rule.
Yeah.
How public are you about that? I mean, you obviously just told everyone. Like,
I hope they're public about that.
But as a candidate, like, do you let that be known, or
No.
is it something you find out later?
I want to avoid somebody is in this mix because they are diverse, which is why I caveated it with, I still have to find the best people.
Okay.
The reason we've instilled it is not because my team doesn't find good people of diverse backgrounds, it's because hiring managers have their own unconscious biases. Mm-hmm. So by putting it out there that this is what we're going to do, again, it turns the lens on them. If I have a senior level search and the best candidates are a white woman, a white man, and another white man, it's what it is. But I want to make sure that people are given the right opportunities and the chances. Yeah.
So as far as what I've seen or I've done at various companies, I think one thing we've done at Venmo early on was have 2-on-1 interviews, and we also made sure there was like a diverse panel of interviewers. And so oftentimes we would find with the male, female interviewers versus there would be like, we would just observe each other and see how like the interviewer would react. And I think that through that we found some cases where it seemed like the interviewer was treating the female interviewer differently than the male. So those were like some small flags that were like, okay, let's talk about that. I think the other area where I feel like it's interesting to hear people's perspectives and to pinpoint potential biases during the kind of post-interview huddle meeting. And I tend to be all of them. So when I hear people kind of bring up things that are like potentially on the line, or like, no, that sounds like it's more of a bias that you have, that's an opportunity.
It really is about instituting equitable processes, right? And I come back to how do we remove the barriers for people? So things like the Rooney Rule, the Mansfield Rule, Diverse Slate, they are all about removing those barriers for underrepresented groups. At Vimeo, we have a really fantastic director of recruiting and talent operations, and she is deeply focused on this and being intentional about making sure that we root out bias in the process. So a few of the things that she's actually working on currently is, of course, standardizing the interview process. So making sure that everyone has the same process as they go through, that you're not meeting with different people or different teams or getting asked different questions. And also using a rubric. So having people debrief and write their thoughts down and assess a candidate by a specific rubric that's tied to the job description. So we are saying that these are the most important things that we want to assess, competency, skills, etc., of the applicant, and we will assess them according to a 5-point scale. And just really working to weave in as much objectivity as possible, so that it takes less of the, those kind of instant reactions where people will say, oh, I thought they were just a little too laid back, right? Well, how does that relate to them actually being able to do their job? Laid back is not necessarily a bad thing, right? If that person, can complete the code or is an engineering whiz, that's what we need, regardless of whether or not they're laid back or soft-spoken, things that are very much subjectively assessed in interviews.
And for us, it was sort of I would say, a 3-part process. One, you mentioned career pages, and one thing that I've tried to do is when writing job descriptions, run it through a system that will flag if it is sort of catering to, more women or men, which is really interesting. I think you guys can just Google that, and it comes right up. And that's been great, especially in the requirements and responsibilities section, and really opening that up so that people feel like maybe if they don't have that exact experience, that they should still apply. So that was one thing. The second thing, kind of echoing what you said, Katrina, is standardizing our recruiting and hiring process for our staff writing roles, which are remote. But we do hire 5 to 10 of them a month. And so with all that, we really had to standardize, questions when it comes to the interview, which is over the phone always. And then we do a test process, an edit test of sorts, so a test for all of the candidates. And that is also rated on a rubric. And the test has been really helpful because it's less, for us when we're hiring for these roles, it's less about the background of the candidate and where they went to school or where they're from, but actually, can they just do the job that they're going to be expected to do every single day? And I've also had to have a little bit of uncomfortable conversations with hiring managers if they, in those sort of debrief conversations, if they're referencing things that are not related at all to, oh, they went to this school, I wonder if they, again, it's not related. So, really having those processes in place and looking at a candidate just based on their skill has been really beneficial and helpful for us.
Yeah,
I just wanted to also give a shout out to Textio. So in terms of job descriptions, that's a tool that we've utilized to review our job descriptions and take out any gendered language and make sure that we're not, putting rock star, coder, or whatever, or ninja of video, in our job descriptions, which is really helpful. And a tool that a lot of companies are using or starting to look at.
I think rubrics, you mentioned rubrics, really important. I mentioned I'm also an adjunct professor, and a lot of the grading happens around rubrics, and even the project Findspark worked on Gray with, which was launching a free portfolio school. The whole thing was, not for a free portfolio school for people who had not been to a portfolio school or a school that has a really strong advertising program in the first place. And so part of where Findspark came in and our screening process was having a rubric of grading for the answers. And, for us, it also just makes your job much easier, right? You're not thinking about things that don't matter. You're like, okay, everyone, I'm doing the same thing. It's so processed. It's, and it's a number. And it's if they hit these numbers, they move on. If they don't, they don't. So I very encourage you to do that sort of rubricing, because it should make your job easier at the end of the day. So a couple of more questions. It's about 10 o'clock. in terms of things that you've done internally, so we talked about the external recruiting, a little bit about like what the importance of employees getting buy-in and that sort of thing. But in terms of the idea of allyship and making sure that as you launch new initiatives, people are aware of them, people get involved, stay engaged, and again, also deciding where and who to support. I think similar to where to start, but specifically on like the internal side, since depending on how large the company is, there might not be enough people for so many different. I think Gray and Vimeo, you both have a handful of people, or these groups, right? But if you're 30 people, maybe just each person talking a little bit about the internal side of getting D&I off the ground and the company involved in that process.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think allyship is a hot topic for everyone. It's really difficult to get people, even if they are an ally, to understand that they should go to this seminar or this panel discussion when it's not directly affecting them, when they're at work and they have business to take care of. In our business, clients are really demanding, and to tell your client, oh, I've got to be gone for 30 minutes to go to this talk, it's really difficult to do. Again, this goes back to our senior leadership and getting them involved. So everyone on the council with me, we gave a executive level mentor. Part of that was just, hey, thank you so much for giving up your spare time to put this off the ground. The other part is to get the executive leadership involved in that way. It's now a personal thing. They want to support their mentee. And hopefully that way they'll get more involved in the events. And if they're involved, then they will tell their entire portfolio that, hey, you guys should really attend this. It's really important that you go. The other thing that we do is we have an internal reputation management team. Very small team, it's 2 people. But they help me build posters and put signage out, and they put it on our app and all of that. And we blast it out, whether it's at our standing room onlys, which are mini town halls that are every other week, or on our video that goes out every other Friday. But we're still grappling with how do we get the right people. We did the ambassador panel, and still we only have 3 men show up. Except for the panel members. So that's actually something that my group is right now trying to tackle in a more detailed way. Like, how do we get more people involved and understand that we need them in order to succeed in all of our initiatives?
So I feel like I've been really lucky in that the companies that I've been part of have like really cared a lot about this, and it was part of their values or their mission. So Kickstarter, we're a public benefit corporation. It is like in our charter that this is something we care about. And then similarly at Petal, like we have values. We're actually like reassessing them, and we're going to make sure that it is inclusive. So I think it's like just part and parcel of what it means to be an employee there. And I think it's the leadership and the fact that they care about it. So I don't really feel like I can give you a great example here of like, where it's been challenging. I mean, I think it is hard in any kind of people-related initiative when people are busy to like prioritize something like this versus other things. And I think it is a matter of getting other employees to like spread the word, to like after an event, like tell the company, hey, this event happened, this is what happened at the event, like, and making sure people feel like they're part of the dialogue. But I don't think that's specific to diversity.
It's very interesting at Vimeo currently. We are in the space where we're working through what does it look like to invite allies into conversations and into the work. And I feel very fortunate that we do have a number of people that really are allies who are incredibly vocal and champions. And we've had conversations about just the privilege that they have, right? And being able to raise issues and to push really hard on things. Because it's not expected of them in the way that it is for underrepresented folks to always speak out, to always champion these issues. And at the same time, research has shown that they are penalized for that work, right? So how do we make sure that everybody is in the fight? Part of it is making sure that our leadership is engaged. So there's actually a requirement that we've built into our D&I strategy for the year. That leaders are accountable for being present at diversity-specific events. And we've mapped out a calendar for them. We clearly call out the opportunities so that they know what's available to them and that they can show up. So part of it is presence. The other part of it is education, making sure that people understand the specific challenges, and then making sure that it's an everyday part of business, that it's not a separate standalone function. That diversity is something that should be part of your everyday and is part of our everyday work, because if we don't get it right, we ultimately will not make our numbers and reach the audiences that we want to reach.
How do you get the senior leadership to actually be held accountable to that part of their job description?
It is literally baked into how their assessment for the year. So they will be part of what they're responsible for is they have to attend a specific number of events. They have to have scorecards that they're referencing and using that show the demographics, and that will drive the conversation.
Do you find that that has kind of a double-edged sword? Because they're kind of being forced to attend? And so does that create a bias of its own that?
It's I don't find that it does. I mean, it's up to them to pick and choose what they want to attend, right?
So it's just like any other requirement?
Yeah, it's like any other, and that's the thing, it's like any other business requirement.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we need to prioritize it and not look at it as this soft, okay, if you could do this, it would be great, but actually, no, you need to do this just in the same way that you need to make sure that you're producing or that you're meeting the quarterly goals, etc. This is part of that. Okay?
For us, I think it's tough because a lot of what you guys said about, that feeling of do employees feel like they're being forced to do something is something that we take really seriously, because we're often doing different trainings and all different things, and they're on their computer the whole time, pretty much. And we've had to definitely ban computers from some trainings and meetings, and then you can just see they're like waiting until it's over. So I think I'm sure all you guys relate there.
Yes.
So I think it's really tough to come up with a curriculum or a training session that people are going to take seriously. And part of it is explaining to those hiring managers, and when we're doing kind of recruiting talks, why that's important. I think the why is so important. Again, we're a little bit luckier because, again, if you're going to work at Bustle, that inclusivity and that is ingrained in our mission and has been since day one. But the idea of, even though you're an ally and you believe it, turning that into actionable things we're not there yet at all. So, I think that's certainly been our challenge, is like, hey, all these people believe this, but how do we get them to actually do things?
So one of the, in conversation with somebody who's a member of one of our tech teams who considers themselves an ally, it is one of the, I shared some resources about what allyship looks like in practice, going beyond just the term and the notion, but it means showing up, and it means lending your privilege, lending your voice. And I think that's important, that people understand that it is less about what you say and more about what you do.
And I think,
sorry, I was just real quick gonna add that it's also really important to kind of give your employees, especially the people at the lowest level, like, encouragement to speak out. And I think we certainly get into a place sometimes where, maybe the more junior employees feel like they can't say something to, whether it's their managers or leadership or anything, and really trying to instill in them that, like, yes, how we're going to get to a place where, we've made progress is that, people of all perspectives and backgrounds are lending their voice. And so I think that's really important.
And I think keeping in mind as well that people have different ways of communicating and sharing their voice and providing different ways of doing that. I'm sure, like, we all have, the friends on social media or Facebook who are super, they post everything, they share everything, they talk about it. But as a adjunct that, teaches social media and to Gen Z, to millennials, just because they grew up with it doesn't mean that they like doing that or they're comfortable doing that. And we actually had a small Findspark dialogue after Marie was there. What incident was that?
It was the Charleston, the hate.
Yeah, so after that, like, neo-Nazi march, like, we threw together just like a super quick dialogue for community members. Hey, if you want to come talk about this, we were here for you, want to provide a space. And a lot of what the folks there were talking about was just everyone is very different with how they want to talk about those types of issues, like on what channels, to what groups of people, and that sort of thing. So recognizing that not everybody might want to post in a Slack group or post on social, but they want to maybe do it in private, or you mentioned smaller settings with the boss. I think that's important to keep in mind as well. So communication styles.
And some forums are better for discussion than other forums. Like it's hard to have a nuanced conversation about a hate rally in Snapchat.
We did that face to face.
Yes, even with emojis and all of that.
Yeah. With the gift
Yes,
command,
yes,
get
yes.
tricky.
Yes.
Gotta keep shuffling
Yes.
until you get the right one.
Yes.
So I do want to save time, of course, for mixing and networking, that sort of thing. So the final question that I'll ask is just for each person to share a little bit about some successes that they've had and different things that they've defined as success, because of course, a lot of people want to talk about ROI and metrics and that sort of thing, and you've all had very different experiences. So maybe just sharing a couple different examples of programs or initiatives or things that you've measured or just counted as a success.
So I have a couple different ones. So I've had the council for 2 years. Obviously, you start small, you do little parties, you do whatever. But this year, we were able to launch 3 really big initiatives that we actually got great press on. So that was huge for me. One of them was we joined the 3% conference with Kat Gordon and created the Progress Brief, which is our new strategic brief, which includes a box on it about diversity, just making sure that we're keeping an eye towards, is this reaching everyone, or have we selected a target that really isn't the actual target for this brand? So to avoid things like, when Dove cut down their footage for social media and they had a Black woman take off her shirt and be white and clean underneath. To avoid things like that, we want to make sure that we have an eye towards it. So that came out of my council, out of my women's group. So we were really happy to see the agency get behind it and launch it. We have a portfolio school that we launched with Findspark, which is, as we mentioned, for underserved populations, people who cannot afford to go to portfolio school. For those of you not in my industry, portfolio school teaches them how to put a book together to get a job. It's $5,000 a quarter. So it is a giant barrier to getting into advertising. And then we end up with all white privileged or, privileged of some sort in our departments because they can't get past that barrier. So that was huge for us. And the third thing, which is a little bit more on the lighthearted side, but still meaningful in our industry, is that if you go onto any of the photo stock sites, every picture of a woman is alone laughing, eating salad. Not really sure.
Eat salad.
And laugh about it. It's so much fun. My favorite was a woman standing in the middle of an empty road. Not sure what she was doing. But so our women's team for Women's Month launched Women's Series with Snacks. And it's all of us internally eating cookies and chips and doing work. It's amazing. We can actually multitask that way. So we launched that, and it's all free on our gallery stock partner. And we want to continue that along the ways to make sure that stock footage really is representative of real population. And so you're not always getting the same images all the time.
I think I'm so early at Funnel. I don't really think I have any things I would note. But I would say in the past, like being able, I know when you talk about ROI, we talk about metrics. I think that is one way of talking about it. I don't think it's the only way it should be, but I know at Venmo, we were able to get to like 35% women in technology, which we're very proud about. Since we started that, like, very low. And that was through the efforts of the engineers themselves. I think so that I was like particularly like helping out as much as I should have been, but like it was because they cared so much, and it was both men and women engineers that they participated. So I think that was pretty awesome.
So at Accenture, it was meeting our goals when it came to representation of gender. So that we at least at an entry level had an equal representation within the workforce, which is really important. The other part of it was that there's a focus on making sure that people
people were in the promotion process, that there was equal access to opportunities to grow and advance in the company. In Vimeo right now, my biggest win so far is aside from setting the strategy, is the engagement of leadership that as part of that process of setting the strategy, they were super involved and really, I would say, deeply engaged in a way that probably wasn't quite expected. And then a second one is definitely our employees who are excited about seeing the momentum and excited about seeing us have a strategy and plan in place, and that we're open and transparent about sharing it, and that there are specific actions that will drive diversity and inclusion through the belonging that we want to get to.
And on my end, on especially like some of the roles that we were recruiting for, we struggled with getting diverse candidates to apply. Women, we had many, but when it came to diversity, numbers were not at all the same as far as what we were getting in. And so last year, I spent a lot of time in partnering with different organizations as well as colleges. And so I kind of figured if we didn't have people just coming to us, I would go and find them. And so going to different colleges, partnering with organizations, especially diverse organizations within those colleges, really helped, and we were able to see an increase in applicants, especially on very entry level, which was great. And then I would say, as far as like a win, this starting in 2018, sort of have been tracking it and have seen a 10% increase in as far as the number of diverse candidates that we've ended up hiring.
Well, can you do a huge round of applause? All of those questions came from all of you, so thank you so much for participating and taking the time to ask questions in advance. And we know there were many other questions, which again is why we're excited for this to be a series. So next month, we're going to be focusing on employer branding. That'll be at our partner tech systems. We also have a digital employer branding workshop coming up on May 9th. Hustle Summit, the diversity recruitment event coming up. What do I got for next? And of course, if you want to talk about any of the things that Findspark has done, ways that we've partnered, say hi to me, say hi to Marie over here, who you might have communicated with before. And this is Gabby, who's making you all internet famous on our social media channels. And again, we're really excited to keep the conversation going because this is going to be a monthly series. Like, please join the Slack group, ask questions, follow up. I know a lot of resources were shared. I'm sure you have all done a lot and have a lot of resources, so we really want that to be a place where you can share and discuss and just easily find each other afterward. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you again to Bustle for hosting and our panelists, and enjoy the rest of the snacks.
Yeah, please eat the food.